Good day, this is Yolandi from the Bible in 1 year, and today we are reading from Genesis chapter 12. This is a chapter about faith, a question we sometimes battle to answer honestly, because whenever you ask a Christian how their faith is doing, the automatic answer will be, "My faith is great." However, when the rubber meets the road, that is usually where we find out if our faith was truly as great as we thought. In the first 9 verses of chapter 12, we see that Abraham, or in this chapter still called Abram, received instruction from the Lord to move to a foreign land, with a promise that the Lord will show him where to go to. It is followed by the covenant the Lord made with Abram by promising in verse 2 that Abram will have many descendants, as well as the promises of blessing and greatness. In verse 3, we see a promise for the whole nation of Israel that God will bless those nations who bless Israel and curse those nations who curse Israel. A promise that still holds truth today. In verse 5, we see that Abram sets out for Canaan. Remember from Genesis 9, verse 20, that the Canaanites were the sons of Canaan, the son of Ham, the son of Noah, that exposed his father's nakedness. Noah cursed him in verse 25 of the same chapter, an important detail to remember as we continue to see how the story unfolds throughout the Old Testament. In verse 7, we read about the promise the Lord made to Abram that the land of Canaan will belong to Abram's descendants. And we see how Abram built an altar to worship the Lord. Now, in life, a promise from the Lord is usually followed by a test. And in verses 10 to 20, we read how Abram's faith completely failed him, and he is depicted not as a hero of faith, but rather as a failure. God called Abram to Canaan, and instead of trusting God's guidance when a sudden famine struck Canaan, Abram decided to take matters into his own hands and move to Egypt. Upon arrival in Egypt, Abram decides to deceive the Pharaoh about his wife, Sarai, due to fear. Sadly, fear instead of faith often leads us to make poor decisions. But God, the Lord intervened to protect Sarai, demonstrating his sovereignty and faithfulness to protect us from our own bad choices, focusing on the fulfillment of his plans. In verse 17 of Genesis 12, we read that the Lord struck Pharaoh and his household with severe plagues. But to be honest, Abram did not deserve the Lord's intervention or protection. God, however, in his mercy and his grace, used the Pharaoh to force Abram to go back to Canaan, the place of promise. What an easy chapter to relate to, because how often do we not also get sidetracked from God's promises? But fortunately for us, nothing we say or do can ever nullify God's plans and promises. And just like he saved Abram from making the biggest mistake ever, he saves us, assuring us of his continuous love, grace, and mercy. May you have a blessed day. Goodbye.